New York City was a place where millions of people crossed paths every single day. The streets were always alive. Taxis moved through the darkness. Subway trains carried strangers beneath the city. Apartment windows glowed above crowded streets. In a city this enormous, disappearing into the crowd was easy. But in the winter of 2026, something began happening that would make an entire community afraid of the darkness. Water. The first incident received little attention. Authorities initially believed it was an isolated case. There was no obvious connection to anything that had happened before. There were no witnesses who could identify a suspect, and there was almost nothing at the scene that could explain what had happened. For the residents of the neighborhood, however, something had changed. A feeling of safety had quietly disappeared. Then it happened again. Different neighborhood, different victim, but investigators noticed similarities that were difficult to ignore. The cases were beginning to form a pattern, and somewhere in the enormous city, someone was carefully watching the investigation unfold. Within weeks, rumors began spreading faster than the police could answer them. People started changing their routines. Some stopped taking the subway after dark. Others rushed home before sunset. Parents became nervous whenever their children were late. Restaurants emptied earlier, and neighborhood streets that had once remained busy until midnight became strangely quiet. The killer had not only taken lives, he had taken something much larger. He had taken the community's sense of security. Detective Maya Carter had spent years investigating difficult cases, but this one was different. The more she studied the evidence, the more she realized that the killer appeared to understand how investigators worked. He seemed to know where police would search. He understood how the media would react. And most disturbing of all, he appeared to be deliberately leaving investigators just enough information to keep them searching. Carter began mapping every incident, location by location, date by date, hour by hour. At first, the map looked completely random. Then she noticed something hidden beneath the chaos. The locations formed a strange path through the city, and when she compared that path with old police records, she discovered something that changed the investigation completely. 20 years earlier, another series of unexplained cases had frightened the same community. The investigation had eventually gone cold. No suspect had been arrested. No convincing explanation had ever been found, and the case had slowly disappeared into the city's enormous archive of forgotten crimes. But Carter discovered something unusual. Several locations from the new investigation were connected to places mentioned in the old case. It could no longer be dismissed as coincidence.
One name appeared repeatedly in the old records: Elias Grant. He had worked in the newspaper archive for nearly 2 decades. He had access to thousands of historical records. He knew the details of old investigations. He knew the neighborhoods. He knew the stories that had been forgotten. And most importantly, he had been a teenager when the original cases occurred.
Carter began investigating Elias's past. What she discovered was disturbing. His family had lived near the center of the original investigation. His father had once been questioned by investigators, and Elias had spent years surrounded by the very documents describing the case. Carter suddenly realized that the killer might not simply be committing crimes. He might be recreating a story that had begun 20 years earlier. When Carter returned to the archive, Elias was gone. His office had been abandoned. The computer was missing. Several files had disappeared. But one document had been left behind. It contained a single location: Harbor Street. Harbor Street was where the original investigation had begun 20 years earlier, and now it appeared to be where the new investigation would end. Carter arrived just before midnight. The waterfront was almost completely deserted. Rain fell across the empty pavement. For several minutes, nothing happened. Then a figure emerged from the darkness. It was Elias Grant. Police surrounded the area. The investigation that had terrified an entire community was finally coming to an end. Elias Grant was arrested without further violence. For the first time in months, residents could begin to believe that the nightmare was over. But investigators were left with one unanswered question: why? The investigation eventually revealed that Elias had spent years obsessed with the unsolved cases from his childhood. He believed the original investigation had been abandoned before the truth was discovered. Over time, his obsession turned into something darker. He began recreating elements of the old case, hoping to force the city to remember what had been forgotten. But instead of solving the past, he created a new nightmare. New York slowly returned to normal. The police patrols became less visible. The news cameras disappeared. People began walking the streets after dark again. But fear leaves behind memories. For months, residents would look over their shoulders whenever they heard footsteps behind them. The city had survived, but it would never completely forget. Several weeks later, Carter believed the case was finally finished. Then an envelope arrived at the police station. There was no return address. Inside was an old photograph from 20 years earlier. Carter studied it carefully. At first, nothing seemed unusual. Then she noticed a face in the background. A face that should not have been there. A face belonging to someone who had supposedly never been connected to the original case. That discovery reopened a question everyone thought had been answered. Had Elias Grant really acted alone? Or had Carter uncovered something far bigger than the case she had just solved? Outside the window, rain began falling over New York once again. The city continued moving. Millions of people continued living their lives. And somewhere among them, another secret remained hidden. Because sometimes the most frightening stories aren't the ones that end. They're the ones that leave you wondering what happens next.